Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. We warned them, harm a human child and you won't live to regret it. The air was thick with the smell of rust and ash, a metallic tang that clung to the back of your throat and refused to let go. Out there, beyond the cracked hull of the Elysium Dawn, the stars burned cold and indifferent, witnesses to a war no one had seen coming. Captain Marcus Kane stood at the viewport, his hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles gleamed white against the dim emergency lighting. The crew moved silently behind him, shadows darting between flickering consoles, their faces drawn with exhaustion and something darker, something that tasted like fear but had hardened into resolve. They'd all heard the transmission, every last one of them, and it had changed everything. It had come crackling through the comms 3 hours ago, a garbled burst of static from the colony on Practice 9. The voice belonged to a kid, couldn't have been more than 10, screaming, pleading, until it cut off with a wet, choking sound that still echoed in Marcus' skull. Then the Crixani had followed, their guttural language slithering through the speakers like oil over water. They'd issued their terms: surrender the system, hand over the mining rights, and maybe, just maybe, they'd let the survivors limp back to Earth. No mention of the kids, no mention of the blood Marcus knew was pooling on the floors of those prefab homes. The Crix didn't negotiate with prey, they devoured it. Marcus had warned them 2 years back when the first Cricani scout ship sniffed around the edge of human space. He'd been there, standing on the deck of a diplomatic frigate staring down their ambassador, a 7-foot nightmare of kitten and claws. "I'm a human child," he'd said, voice steady as steel, "and you won't live to regret it." The translator had buzzed, spitting his words into their tongue, and the ambassador's mandibles had twitched, a sound like laughter scraping out of its throat. They hadn't believed him. They'd thought humans were soft, fragile, little more than cattle with delusions of grandeur. They'd been wrong. Now Practice 9 was burning, and the Elysium Dawn was the closest ship in range. Marcus turned from the viewport, his gray eyes catching the light like a blade's edge. "Status," he barked, and Lieutenant Raza snapped to attention, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled up the scans. "They've got 3 warships in orbit," she said, voice tight. "Particle cannons, hot shields, full ground forces entrenched. Looks like they've rounded up the colonists into holding pens. No life signs from the eastern sector." "None," Marcus replied, his jaw tightening. The eastern sector was where the school had been. He didn't need to ask what that meant. "And the kids." Raza hesitated, her dark eyes flicking to the floor before meeting his again. "Some are still alive. Thermal scans show smaller heat signatures in the pens, but not many, not many." The words hit like a punch to the gut, but Marcus didn't flinch. He couldn't, not now. "Get me a line to the fleet and arm everything we've got," he ordered. The crew didn't question him. They'd seen the footage from the outer colonies, Cricani claws tearing through steel doors, families dragged screaming into the dark. Humans weren't the strongest species out here, not the fastest or the toughest, but they had something the Crix didn't understand. A line you didn't cross, a promise you didn't break. And when that line was crossed, when that promise was shattered, humans didn't just fight, they burned the universe down to make it right. Within minutes, the Elysium Dawn hummed with power, its rail guns charging, missiles locking into place. Marcus patched through to the fleet, his voice steady despite the rage boiling under his skin. "This is Captain Kane, Elysium Dawn. Practice 9 is under attack. Cricani forces have killed our people, our kids. I'm going in. Anyone who's got the stomach for it, follow me. Anyone who doesn't, stay the hell out of my way." The response was immediate. Ships across the sector lit up the comms, freighters, haulers, even a few patched-up civilian rigs. No one said no, not today. Marcus cut the line and turned to his crew. "We're not here to negotiate, we're not here to survive, we're here to make them pay, every last one of them." Raza nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. The helmsman, a wiry kid named Tors, cracked his knuckles and grinned like he'd been waiting for this his whole life. The Elysium Dawn lurched forward, engines roaring as it broke from its patrol route and hurtled toward Practice 9. The Cricani warships loomed on the scanners, their sleek insectoid hulls glinting against the planet's atmosphere. They didn't know what was coming. They didn't know what humans became when you took something they loved. Marcus thought of that kid's voice, the scream cut short, and his hands tightened on the command console. The Cricani had been warned, they'd laughed, now they'd learn. Space itself seemed to hold its breath as the Elysium dawn closed the distance. A lone spark racing toward a firestorm, and in Marcus' chest something cold and unyielding took root. A promise not just to fight, but to win, for the kids, for the blood already spilled, for the warning they'd ignored. The first shot rang out, a railgun slug tearing through the void, and the war began. The Elysium dawn shuddered as the first Krakani particle beam grazed its hull, a searing streak of violet light that carved a molten scar across the port side. Alarms blared, a shrill cacophony that drowned out the crew's shouts as they scrambled to their stations. Marcus Kane gripped the edge of the command console, his gray eyes locked on the tactical display where red blips swarmed like hornets around the green dot of his ship. The Krakani warships were closing in, their movements precise, predatory, 3 against 1. Outnumbered, outgunned, and outclassed, any sane captain would have turned tail and run, but Marcus wasn't sane anymore, not after that kid's scream. "Tor's evasive pattern delta," he roared, voice cutting through the chaos. The helmsman's hands flew across the controls, and the ship lurched hard to starboard, engines screaming as they pushed past their limits. A second beam missed by inches, sizzling through the void where they'd been moments before. Raza target their lead ship, rail guns and missiles full spread, hit them where it hurts. Lieutenant Raza didn't hesitate, her fingers dancing over the weapon's console. "Locked and loaded, sir, firing now." The Elysium dawn spat fury into the dark, railgun slugs accelerating to hypersonic speeds, followed by a salvo of missiles trailing fiery tails. The lead Krakani ship, a jagged monstrosity bristling with spines, took the brunt of it. Explosions bloomed across its hull, chunks of chitinous armor spinning into space, but it didn't falter. The Krakani built their ships like they built their bodies, hard, relentless, and damn near unbreakable. "They're returning fire," Tors yelled, and the deck tilted as another beam slammed into the shields. The lights flickered, and Marcus felt the impact in his bones, a deep, rattling shudder that promised worse to come. The shields were holding for now, but they wouldn't last forever. He didn't care. This wasn't about survival. It was about reaching Practice 9, about getting to those pens where the kids were still alive, their tiny heat signatures flickering on the scans like candles in a storm. "Fleet's inbound, sir," Raza said, her voice steady despite the sweat beading on her forehead. "ETA 10 minutes. They're patching through. Admiral Voss wants a word. Put her on." The comms crackled, and a woman's voice came through, sharp and clipped, the kind of voice that could cut glass. "Kane, what the hell are you doing? You're 1 ship against 3. You'll be scrapped before we get there." Marcus didn't blink. "They've got our kids. Voss killed most of them already. I'm not waiting." A pause, heavy with static. "Then you're insane, but we're coming. Hold them off, Kane. That's an order." "Wasn't planning on dying yet," he said, and cut the line. He turned to the crew, their faces lit by the glow of sparking consoles. "You heard her. 10 minutes. We keep them busy, we buy time for the fleet, and then we tear them apart." The Elysium dawn dove into the fray, weaving through a storm of particle beams and kinetic rounds. Tors pushed the ship to its breaking point, dodging with a reckless grace that defied physics. Raza unleashed everything they had, missiles and rail guns, hammering the Krakani lead ship until its shields flickered and died. The first kill came with a satisfying flash. A missile punched through the enemy's hull, igniting its core in a silent, brilliant fireball. The crew didn't cheer. There was no time. The other 2 ships adjusted their movements, eerily synchronized, and the barrage intensified. Marcus' mind raced, replaying that transmission, the kid's voice breaking into sobs before the silence. The colony logs showing that, before the attack, Practice 9 had been a backwater, a speck of dirt with a few thousand souls, mostly miners and their families, kids who'd grown up chasing each other through dusty streets, dreaming of Earth they'd never seen. Now they were gone, or worse, caged by monsters who didn't even see them as alive, just meat to leverage a deal. His fists tightened until his nails bit into his palms, drawing blood. "Sir, shields at 30%, Raza called. "We can't take much more." "Then don't," Marcus snapped. "Ram the bastard if you have to, just keep them off the planet." Tors shot him a wild grin. "You serious, Cap?" "Dead serious." The helmsman laughed, a sharp, jagged sound, and angled the Elysium dawn toward the second Krakani ship. It was a desperate move, a suicide play, but Marcus didn't care. The Krakani had underestimated humans, once thinking them weak, pliable. They didn't know what happened when you backed a human into a corner, when you took their kids and left them nothing to lose. The ship surged forward, engines roaring, a battered arrow aimed at the heart of the enemy. Then the scanners lit up, green blips flooding in from the edge of the system. The fleet, freighters retrofitted with guns, haulers bristling with makeshift weapons, civilian ships that had no business in a fight but were here anyway. Humans, not soldiers, not warriors, just people who'd heard the same transmission as Marcus had, who'd felt the same rage. The Krakani ships hesitated, their formation faltered as the odds shifted. Marcus bared his teeth in something that wasn't a smile. Show them what happens when they don't listen. The Elysium Dawn struck, and the void erupted in fire. The Elysium Dawn collided with the second Krakani warship in a scream of metal and fire, a glancing blow that sent both ships spinning through the void. The impact threw Marcus Kane against the command console, his shoulder slamming into the edge with a crack. He felt more than heard pain flaring hot and sharp, but he ignored it, hauling himself upright as the deck tilted beneath his feet. Sparks rained from the ceiling, and the air tasted of ozone and blood. The crew clung to their stations, faces pale but fierce, their eyes reflecting the chaos outside, where the human fleet swarmed the Krakani like wolves on a wounded beast. "Damage report," Marcus shouted over the wail of alarms. Raza coughed, wiping a streak of soot from her face as she scanned the readouts. "Shields are gone, sir. Hull breaches on decks 3 and 4, emergency seals holding, but we've lost 2 rail guns, engines at 60%, enough to fight." Marcus said more to himself than to her. He straightened, ignoring the ache in his shoulder, and stared at the tactical display. The second Krakani ship was crippled, its whole atmosphere venting in shimmering plumes, but the third was still intact, its particle cannons carving through the human fleet with ruthless precision. Freighters exploded in silent bursts, and civilian rigs were torn apart before they could fire a shot. These weren't trained soldiers, just miners, traders, parents who'd grabbed whatever they could and come running, and they were dying. "Tors, get us between that bastard and the fleet," Marcus ordered. "Reroute power to the forward guns, everything we've got left." Tors didn't argue, though his grin had faded, replaced by a grim set to his jaw. The Elysium Dawn groaned as it turned its engine, sputtering but obedient, thrusting the battered ship into the line of fire. A particle beam rayed across their bow, and the whole vessel shuddered, lights dimming as power drained to the weapons. Raza fired back a desperate volley of missiles and rail gun slugs that slammed into the third Krakani ship's shields, cracking them like glass. It wasn't enough to kill it, not yet, but it bought the fleet a breath, a chance to regroup. Marcus' gaze flicked to the planet below Practice 9's surface, a smear of brown and gray through the atmosphere. Somewhere down there, the kids were still alive, trapped in those pens, waiting for someone to come. He could almost hear their cries, faint echoes of that transmission looping in his mind. He promised the Krakani they'd pay, and he meant it, but promises didn't mean a damn thing if he couldn't get to them. "Sir, incoming transmission," Raza said, her voice cutting through his thoughts. "It's the Krakani." Marcus' blood ran cold. "Patch it through." The comms hissed, and that guttural, oily voice filled the bridge, the translator struggling to keep up. "Human vessel, you fight without honor. Surrender now or we slaughter the young ones one by one." Slowly, a chill swept through the crew, a collective intake of breath. Marcus felt it too, a spike of ice in his gut, but it burned away under the heat of his rage. He leaned into the comms, his voice low and lethal. "You think you can threaten us? You think that'll stop us? We warned you, harm a human child and you're done. Start killing and I'll make sure your entire species feels it." The Krakani didn't respond immediately, their silence heavy, calculating. Then a sound came through, not words, but a high, keening wail, unmistakably human. A child's scream, raw and terrified, cut off by a wet crunch. The line went dead. Marcus stood frozen, the sound searing into his soul. The bridge was silent, every eye on him, waiting. He turned to the viewport, staring at the Krakani ship, its insected bulk a dark stain against the stars. "Tors," he said, his voice a blade, full speed, ram them. "Sir," Raza started, but he cut her off with a look. "They just killed one of ours on purpose to make a point." His hands shook, not with fear, but with a fury so deep it felt like it could crack the hull. "We're not waiting for the fleet. We end this now." Tors nodded, his hand steady as he pushed the throttle to its limit. The Elysium Dawn surged forward, a dying beast with one last fight in it, aimed straight at the Krakani ship. The enemy fired beams, tearing into the hull, but Marcus didn't flinch. He saw the pens in his mind, the kids huddling together, their parents gone, their hope fading. He saw that ambassadors twitching mandibles, the laughter that had mocked his warning. They'd thought humans were weak, they'd thought wrong. The fleet rallied behind them, inspired or insane. It didn't matter, ships of every make and model charging into the fray. The Krakani ship loomed closer, its shields flickering under the Elysium Dawn's relentless barrage. Marcus braced himself, the collision seconds away when a new blip appeared on the scanners, massive, fast, and human. A dreadnought, the Vindicator, flagship of the sector fleet, dropping out of hyperspace with guns blazing. "Hold course," Marcus barked, and the Elysium Dawn struck a glancing blow that ripped through the Krakani's weakened shields. The Vindicator followed, its cannons unleashing hell, and the enemy ship erupted in a cascade of fire and debris. Marcus exhaled, his breath ragged, but there was no relief, only the burning need to get to the surface. The kids were still down there, and the Krakani weren't done paying. The Elysium Dawn hung in the void, a broken husk trailing smoke and sparks, its hull scarred from the collision that had crippled the last Krakani warship. Marcus Kane stood amidst the wreckage of the bridge, his breath fogging in the cold as emergency systems struggled to keep the ship alive. The Vindicator loomed nearby, mopping up the debris with surgical precision, but Marcus' eyes were fixed on Practice 9 below. The kids were still down there, their faint heat signatures a fragile thread pulling him forward. That scream over the comms, cut short by a Krakani claw, played on a loop in his skull, fueling a rage that drowned out the pain in his shoulder. "Raza, can we land?" he asked, voice rough as gravel. She glanced at the flickering consoles, her face grim. "Engines are barely holding, sir. We've got one shot, crash landing. Maybe no guarantees we walk away." "Do it, Marcus," he said without hesitation. "Tors, plot us a course straight for those pens." Tors nodded, hands shaking as he wrestled the dying ship into position. The Elysium Dawn groaned, its frame trembling as it nosed toward the planet. The Vindicator hailed them. Admiral Voss's voice crackled through. "Kane, stand down, we'll handle the ground assault. You're in no shape to fight, they're killing kids, Voss." Marcus snapped, "I'm not waiting." He cut the line, ignoring her protests. The descent began, a fiery plunge through the atmosphere that rattled the ship apart, bulkheads buckled, and a section of the ceiling collapsed, nearly crushing Raza. She cursed, dragging herself free, blood trickling from a gash on her forehead. The ground rushed up, a blur of dust and ruin, and the Elysium Dawn hit hard, skidding across Practice 9's surface in a shower of dirt and metal. Marcus was thrown forward, slamming into the viewport, but he forced himself up, adrenaline numbing the pain. "Gear up," he barked, grabbing a rifle from the armory rack. The crew followed, battered but unbroken, their faces set with the same fire burning in him. They spilled out into a wasteland of shattered homes and smoldering craters. The air stank of death, and in the distance the Krakani pens loomed, crude cages of twisted steel. Marcus moved fast, his boots crunching over debris until he saw them. Dozens of kids, filthy and wide-eyed, pressed against the bars. A Krakani guard turned, its claws dripping red, and Marcus fired without thinking, the slug punching through its skull. The kids screamed, some sobbing, others staring in silence as Marcus tore the cage open. "You're safe now," he lied, knowing more Krakani were coming. He looked into their hollow eyes, saw the cost of his delay, and swore the bastards would pay in blood. The Vindicator's drop ships roared overhead, but Marcus was already moving, rifle raised, ready to finish what he'd started. Dust swirled around Marcus Kane as he knelt by the shattered cage, his rifle still warm from the shot that had dropped the Krakani guard. The kids stumbled out, some clinging to each other, others too stunned to move, their small bodies trembling under layers of grime and fear. A girl, no older than 8, stared up at him with eyes like cracked glass, her voice a whisper. "They took my brother." Marcus' chest tightened, the weight of her words sinking into him like a blade. He wanted to promise he'd find the boy, bring him back, but the lie stuck in his throat. He'd heard the crunch over the comms. He knew what it meant. "Stay close," he said instead, his voice rough but steady. "We're getting you out." The crew fanned out, forming a ragged perimeter around the kids. Raza with her pistol drawn, Tors clutching a shotgun, their faces hard despite the exhaustion carving lines into their skin. Above, the Vindicators' drop ships touched down, kicking up storms of dirt as Marines poured out, their armor gleaming against the desolation. But Marcus didn't wait for them. He couldn't. The Krakani were still here, their guttural roars echoing from the ruins, and every second meant another life snuffed out. He led the group forward, weaving through the wreckage of Practice's 9 streets, prefab homes reduced to twisted metal, playgrounds buried under ash. The kids shuffled behind him, their footsteps soft but heavy with the silence of trauma. Raza flanked him, her breath ragged, the gash on her forehead still bleeding. "Scanners picked up movement, sir," she muttered. 200 meters east, big group, they're coming." Marcus growled, his grip tightening on the rifle. He glanced back at the kids, their pale faces lit by the flicker of distant fires, and felt that cold, unyielding thing in his chest twist sharper. The Krakani hadn't just attacked a colony. They'd targeted the weakest, the ones humans would die to protect. It wasn't strategy, it was cruelty, and it was a mistake. The first wave hit like a storm. Krakani warriors charging from the shadows, their claws glinting, mandibles snapping with that sickening click. Marcus fired slugs, tearing through Kitten, dropping 2 before they could close the gap. Tors roared, his shotgun blasting a third into a spray of gore, while Raza picked off stragglers with precise, furious shots. The kids screamed, huddling behind a fallen wall as the fight turned brutal. Claws raked at Marcus' arm, slicing through his suit, but he drove his rifle butt into the creature's skull, feeling it crack under the blow. The Marines arrived mid-chaos, their rifles lighting up the night, and the Krakani faltered, their numbers thinning. Marcus didn't stop pushing forward, his vision narrowed to the next target, then the next. Blood slicked his hands, his own and theirs, it didn't matter. He saw that ambassador's laughter in every twitching mandible, heard that kid's scream in every clash of steel and bone. They'd been warned, they hadn't listened. A shadow loomed ahead, a Krakani commander taller than the rest, its armor scarred and dripping with red. It held a human arm, small and limp like a trophy. Marcus froze at the sight, punching through his rage into something raw, something that hurt. The commander hissed, its voice grating through the translator. "You fight for nothing, human. Your young are gone, your world will follow." Marcus didn't answer with words. He charged, rifle blazing, rounds slamming into the commander's chest. It staggered but swung its claws, slashing across his side and tearing flesh. Pain seared through him, but he dropped the rifle, drew his knife, and drove it into the creature's throat, twisting until black ichor sprayed his face. It collapsed, gurgling, and he stood over it, breathing hard, the arm still clutched in its dead grip. He turned, ignoring the agony in his side, and saw the kids watching, wide-eyed, silent. The Marines swept in, securing the area, but Marcus barely noticed. He knelt, picking up the arm, its tiny fingers curled as if reaching for something lost. It was too small, too fragile, and it broke something in him he hadn't known was still whole. He set it down gently, his hands shaking, and looked at the girl who'd spoken earlier. She was crying now, quiet sobs that cut deeper than any claw. "We're not done," he said, more to himself than to her. The Krakani had retreated, but their ships still orbited, their forces still held parts of the planet. The Vindicator could handle the sky, but the ground was his. He stood, wincing as blood seeped through his torn suit, and nodded to Raza. "Round up the survivors, we're hunting." "Sir," she hesitated, her eyes flicking to his wounds. I need them dead." He cut her off, his voice a low snarl. "Every last one." He turned east, where the scanners had pinged, and started walking, the kids' soft steps trailing behind him like ghosts. The war wasn't over, not until the Krakani learned what humans did when you crossed that line. The wind howled across Practice 9's ruined landscape, carrying the stench of charred metal and alien blood. As Marcus Kane led his ragged band eastward, his side throbbed with every step, the gash from the Krakani commander's claws leaking through the hasty bandage Raza had slapped on during a brief pause. The kids trailed behind, a silent procession of hollow eyes and trembling hands, their trust in him a weight heavier than the rifle slung across his back. He didn't look at them. He couldn't. Afraid he'd see that small, severed arm in every shadow, a reminder of how late he'd been. Raza marched beside him, her pistol gripped tight, her face a mask of determination despite the blood crusting her forehead. Tors brought up the rear, shotgun ready, his usual bravado replaced by a quiet intensity that matched the Marines fanning out around them. The Vindicators' drop ships had secured the landing zone, but the Krakani still held ground, entrenched in the eastern sector, where the scanners had last pinged a mass of heat signatures. Marcus didn't know if it was more kids or just soldiers waiting to die. Either way, he was coming for them. The terrain shifted as they approached a sprawl of mining rigs and storage silos twisted into a jagged maze by the attack. The air grew thick, heavy with the hum of kryptonite, a low vibration that set Marcus' teeth on edge. He raised a fist, signaling the group to halt, and crouched behind a toppled crane. Ahead, the enemy waited. A fortified outpost, its walls bristling with turrets, Krakani warriors packing like ants around a nest, and there in the center another pen, smaller, crudder, but unmistakable, more kids. Marcus' breath caught, his rage flaring anew. He counted at least 20 guards, their claws glinting in the dim light, and 2 hulking figures. Elites, maybe, their armor thicker, their movements deliberate. The turrets swiveled, scanning the perimeter, and he knew a frontal assault would be suicide. But waiting wasn't an option. Not with those kids so close, their faint cries drifting on the wind. "Raza Tor's flank left with half the Marines," he whispered, his voice a low growl. "Draw their fire, I'll take the rest. Right, hit the pen directly." Raza's eyes narrowed. "Sir, you're bleeding out, let me," she snapped, cutting him off. "They don't get another second with those kids." She held his gaze, then nodded, slipping away with Tors and a handful of Marines. Marcus turned to the remaining soldiers, their faces grim but resolute. "Fast and hard, we get in, get the kids, get out, no heroics, just results." The plan ignited moments later. Raza's team opened fire from the left, a barrage of bullets and grenades that lit up the night. The Krakani reacted instantly, turrets swinging, warriors charging toward the distraction. Marcus moved, leading his group in a sprint across open ground, his sides screaming with every stride. A turret caught them mid-run, its beam slicing through a Marine beside him, reducing the man to ash. Marcus didn't stop, didn't flinch. His focus locked on the pen. He reached it first, slamming into the bars with a shoulder that nearly gave out. Inside, a dozen kids cowered, their faces streaked with dirt and tears. A Krakani elite loomed over them, its claw raised, but Marcus was faster. His rifle barked, slugs tearing through its chest. It staggered, roaring, and he fired again, dropping it in a heap. The Marines caught up, blasting the lock, and the cage sprang open. "Move," Marcus shouted, ushering the kids out. They stumbled toward him, some too weak to stand, and he scooped up a boy who couldn't have weighed more than a rifle clip, his thin frame shaking against Marcus' chest. The outpost erupted around them, Raza's team still drawing fire, the Krakani regrouping, their roars growing louder. A second elite charged, its claws slashing, and Marcus shoved the boy behind him, taking the hit across his arm. Blood sprayed, but he drove his knife into the creature's eye, twisting until it fell. The Marines formed a shield, firing as they retreated, the kids between them. Marcus limped at the rear, his vision blurring, the boy clinging to his leg. He saw Raza and Tors breaking back toward them, their faces bloodied but alive, and felt a flicker of relief, but it died fast. The ground shook, a deep rumble rising from the outpost. A Krakani war machine, a towering beast of metal and claws, emerged from the shadows, its cannons glowing hot. "Run!" Marcus yelled, shoving the kids toward the Marines. He turned to face it alone now, his rifle raised despite the blood pooling at his feet. The machine advanced, its roar deafening, and he bared his teeth. They'd taken too much already. He wasn't giving them this overhead. The Vindicator's guns thundered, a salvo raining down, but Marcus didn't look up. He fired a defiant gesture and braced for the end. The Krakani war machine loomed over Marcus Kane, a colossus of jagged steel and glowing death, its cannons whining as they charged. His rifle spat slugs into its armored hide, sparks flaring where they struck, but it was like throwing pebbles at a tidal wave. Blood dripped from his arm and side, pooling in the dust at his feet, and his legs trembled, threatening to buckle behind him. The kids' footsteps faded as the Marines hustled them away, their cries swallowed by the roar of the Vindicator's orbital barrage. The sky lit up with streaks of fire raining down, but the machine kept coming, its claws raking the ground inches from where he stood. Marcus didn't move. He couldn't, not with the kids so close to safety, not with the promise he'd made burning in his chest. The Krakani had laughed at his warning, torn apart everything he'd sworn to protect, and now they'd pay, even if it cost him everything. He dropped the empty rifle, drew his knife, and squared his shoulders, a snarl twisting his lips. "Come on, you bastard," he muttered, voice lost in the chaos. "Let's finish this." The machine lunged, a claw swiping down, and Marcus dove aside, the impact cratering the earth where he'd been. Pain exploded through his wounds, but he rolled to his feet, slashing at a hydraulic line on its leg. Black fluid sprayed, and the machine staggered, its cannons firing wild, carving gouges into the ruins above. The Vindicator's salvos hammered closer, one slamming into the outpost's wall, sending debris raining down. Marcus ducked under another claw, his knife finding a joint and twisting until something snapped. The machine screeched, a sound that rattled his bones, but it wasn't enough. He heard Raza shouting his name, distant and desperate, and glanced back to see her sprinting toward him, Tors at her side, their weapons blazing. "Get back!" he roared, but they didn't stop firing at the machine, its sensors drawing its attention. A cannon swung toward them, and Marcus' heart lurched. He threw himself at its leg, stabbing deep, anything to keep it focused on him. The beam fired, missing Raza by a hair, and she stumbled, cursing but kept coming. The ground shook again, not from the machine, but from something new. Dropships, more Marines, their engines a thunderous chorus. Reinforcements from the Vindicator hitting the dirt hard, their rifles cutting through the Krakani stragglers swarming from the outpost. The machine turned distracted, and Marcus seized the chance, climbing its leg, his blood-slick hands slipping as he hauled himself toward its core. Every move was agony, his vision swimming, but he saw those kids' faces, the girls' cracked glass eyes, the boys' frail grip, and pushed harder. Raza reached him first, grabbing his leg to steady him as he stabbed into a glowing panel. "You're insane, sir," she yelled, her voice raw. Tors joined her, blasting at the machine's joints, and together they fought, a desperate trio against a titan. The panel sparked, then erupted, and the machine convulsed, throwing Marcus off. He hit the ground hard, air rushing from his lungs, and watched as it staggered, its cannons dimming, before a final Vindicator strike tore through its chest, reducing it to a smoking wreck. Silence fell, heavy and surreal, broken only by the crackle of flames and the hum of drop ships. Marcus lay there, chest heaving, blood soaking the dirt beneath him. Raza dropped to her knees beside him, her hands pressing against his side, her face pale. "Stay with me, damn it," she said, her voice cracking. Tors stood guard, shotgun trembling in his grip, his eyes scanning the ruins for more threats. The Marines swept in, securing the kids, their voices a distant buzz. Marcus forced himself up, ignoring Raza's protests, and staggered toward the group. The girl from the pen was there, clutching a younger boy, her tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. "You came back," she whispered, and it hit him harder than any claw because he almost hadn't. "We're not done," he rasped, looking past her to the horizon where Krakani's ships still darkened the sky. The Vindicator had cleared the orbit, but pockets of resistance remained on the ground, and Marcus knew they'd fight to the last. He turned to Raza, his voice steady despite the pain. "Get the kids to the drop ships, I'm finishing this." "Sir, you can barely stand," she argued, but he shook his head. "They don't get to walk away from this," he said, his gray eyes cold as steel. "Not after what they did." He picked up a fallen rifle, checked the clip, and started walking, the weight of his promise driving him forward. The kids were safe for now, but the Krakani hadn't paid enough, not yet.